Today's bass fisherman, especially the beginner, is faced with literally thousands of lure choices. It seems that every day new innovations come along in every style, shape, and color. Just browse through any well-stocked tackle shop and the sheer numbers of baits and lures to choose from will amaze you. Though today's technology allows for more lifelike lures made of space-age materials, sometimes it's best to get back to the basics. And that is what the next hour is all about. World champion fisherman Paul Elias brings the basics back to bass. There's no one better equipped than Paul Elias to demonstrate the basics of bass fishing. Paul has won several national championships, including the Bass Masters Classic. He's known as the originator of the kneel and reel method of crankbaiting and has gained a reputation as a well-rounded angler, adept at virtually any style of fishing. Today, Paul will discuss and demonstrate 4 basic bass lures: worms, crankbaits, spinnerbaits, and jigs. The weather conditions today are less than desirable for fishing, with a series of cold fronts pushing through during the day. But Paul hopes to show you that even during the worst of conditions, each lure type has its specific advantages. Especially when the odds are against you, it's best to go back to the basics. And now, here's Paul Elias.
There ought to be a fish up in that brush pile. There is a fish in that brush pile. There he is. Oh yeah, Mr. Bass. Oh yeah, right where he's supposed to be. Yeah, come here. Nice fish. All right, cut up, cut up. Come here, darling. Okay, okay. Say hi. Come here. There you go. Oh, the hook just fell out of his mouth. Lucky to have it. Beautiful fat fish. Mr. Bass. You know, over the past 10 or 12 years, there's been just a big surge, a big demand to find out a little bit more about catching a largemouth bass. From the serious professional angler all the way down to the weekend fisherman or the novice fisherman, everybody tries to get just as much literature and material and watch just as many shows and how-to videos and everything else on how to catch Mr. Bass. Well, today, during this video, we're going to get right down to the basics of bass fishing. We're going to try to catch fish on the 4 main ways that bass are normally caught, or the 4 ways that I think bass are normally caught. And that's going to be the plastic worm. Hopefully, we're going to catch some on a spinnerbait. We're going to use crankbaits, and we're going to use the jig and pig. But first, before we get into all that, I think the most important thing is understanding a little bit about Mr. Bass. Understanding how he lives and where he lives, his habits, and his habitat. When you understand more about that, it'll be a lot easier to catch that fish. You know, probably the main thing to consider about a largemouth bass is that he's a cover-oriented fish. He's an ambush fish. In other words, he's got to have somewhere to hide from his bait fish. He's the predator, and and little old fish, the shad, the bluegill, the crawfish, are what he feeds on. So he hides from them, and they come swimming by, and he shoots out there and catches them. So right off the bat, that tells you that you need to look for bass around some kind of cover. Some kind of visual cover is probably one of the best ways to look for fish. So keeping that in mind, that bass are a cover-oriented fish, you're going to approach a lake by looking for brush piles and other type stuff. So throughout the video, we're going to try to teach you just the basic fundamentals of catching bass, all the way from the tackle to catching them. So stick with us. I believe you'll enjoy it. As you noticed at the opening of the video, we caught that fish on a plastic worm. And that's going to be the first segment that we're going to discuss during the video. The plastic worm is the widest used bass fishing lure in the whole country today. And it's rightfully so, because when you rig it properly, you can fish it around and through any kind of cover you've got on the lake. So probably the first thing you need to talk about, and it's the first thing you need to talk about in any type of fishing, is your equipment. Because you have to adapt your equipment to the type fishing you're doing. So when you're plastic worm fishing, the first thing you got to remember is the plastic worm's going to be thrown up in the cover, just like we talked about at the start. The bass is in the cover, and you can take that plastic worm and throw it right up in the thick and heavy cover. And when you do that, as mean as that old bass is, you got to have some real good equipment, some heavy duty equipment, in order to get that bass out of that heavy cover. Now, the first thing we need to talk about is your rod. And your rod has got to be a real stiff action rod, okay? And I would say heavy action is what you're going to need to use. Now, some people use a medium heavy action, some people use a medium action. But my opinion is you need a real heavy action rod, a rod that can take the abuse of just horsing a good 4 to 5, 6 pound, even 8 pound bass out of heavy cover. I like a long rod. I use a 7-foot rod myself. But I would say anything from 6 to 7, 7.5 foot is fine for worm fishing, but you need that good heavy action. Your reel needs to be a reel that has got a strong gear ratio, okay, and it's got to have heavy duty gears in it, because when you set the hook on that fish, she's in heavy cover and you want to get her out, you need something that can crank that fish out of heavy cover. I use Quantum reels made by Zebco. They got a 5-to-1 gear ratio and they're strong, okay? When you get that fish, hit that fish hard, get her coming your way, you got the power to crank that fish up out of that cover. Your fishing line's the same way. You need a heavy-duty fishing line. I use Trilene XT, extra tough fishing line. Today, while I'm worm fishing, I'm going to be using 20-pound tests. Now, under different fishing situations, you can drop down as low as 10-pound tests. So, again, you've got to adapt your tackle to what you're doing. If you're fishing a clear water lake, you're going to want to drop down in test line. If you're fishing water that's murky, just like what we're fishing today, and throwing up into heavy cover, you want to go up into that 20-pound class where you can horse that fish out of there. 20-pound test line will normally get most of your fish out of any kind of cover that you fish around. Probably the most all-around used pound test line on worm fishing would probably be 14-pound test. So you've got a wide range, 10 to 20-pound tests on your fishing line. You've got to adapt it to the situation where you're fishing. All right, your hook. Your hook is a very important part of worm fishing. Now, there's several different size hooks. And of course, you get right back into adapting to what you're doing. You got to adapt your hook size to your worm size and also to your fish size. So, probably the most important thing is the size of the worm and the size of the hook. But first, the main thing you want to look for in a hook is a good sharp point. And the majority of the hooks that you buy on the market today don't come with a good sharp point, so you need to sharpen them yourself. Because when you rig a worm, like I'm going to do in just a few seconds, you'll see that you've got to penetrate the plastic in order to get in the fish's mouth. So you've got to have a sharp hook in order to do that. Now, we're going to rig a worm, but we're going to rig it Texas style. And the reason I'm saying we're going to rig it Texas style is because that's the kind of worm fishing we're going to discuss today. And it's probably the best all-around way to fish a worm, because the worm is rigged weedless. Now, the first thing you got to do before you rig a worm is you got to take a fishing weight, a worm weight, which is basically a piece of lead. And they're going to come in all sizes also. So you're going to have to, you choose the size lead according to the type fishing you're doing. So if you're going to be fishing real shallow water without a whole bunch of cover, you're going to use a small weight, like an 1/8 ounce weight. Okay? If you're getting up, stepping up into a little bit heavier cover, you're going to go to 3/16 or even do a quarter. All right? Then if you're going to get into throwing into bushes and things like we're going to be doing a lot of today, you're going to go to 3/8 or even 1/2 ounce. So you've got a lot of worm weight sizes, and you've got to adapt those sizes to the type fishing that you're doing. But basically, I would say the 1/8 ounce to 1/4 ounce is the widest used range of weights. Probably 3/16 is used more all around than any other size weight. When the wind's blowing, you got to take that into consideration. You got to go to a little heavier weight when the wind's blowing. All right, let's take this 1/4 ounce weight right here. And basically what you're going to do is slide this bullet-shaped weight with the slender part first right down the line. There's a little hole in it, and you run it right through that hole. Okay? Then you take your hook. You tie it on. Now the knot that I'm going to tie is a basic fisherman's knot. We call it the trilene knot. But a lot of people that tie the fisherman's knot mess up because they don't tie it in this manner. Now we've slid that line through the eye of the hook. What we're going to do is turn right around and go right back through the eye of the hook again. Okay? When we do that, that makes a loop. Now we're going to keep that loop. We're going to stay in contact with that loop. We're going to bring the tag end of the line up and wrap it 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now once you do that, we're going to come around here. That made another loop. And we're going to slide that tag in right through both loops. See what we've done here? We've slid it right through both loops. All right, now when you do that, you just get it down and wet it. The reason you wet it is so it'll cinch up tight and it won't burn itself. All right, you wet your line and cinch the knot up. Okay, you got a good fishing knot right there. It's called a trilene knot. It's very easy to tie once you try it. You've got it step by step right here on film now. If you'll try to learn it, it'll be one of the best knots that you can ever tie on just about every method of fishing. You'll see as we go through the methods we're doing today, I'll use this knot on practically everything. Now we've got to rig the worm on the hook. All right, let's just take one of these variety of worms here. This grape right here is a real good fish producing color. It's got a chartreuse tail on it. Grape and chartreuse are probably 2 of the best fish producers there is. But basically, if you look at this worm, the tail is curved up right here. And there's a seam to this worm. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. There's a seam going down this worm, and that's the way the worm was molded. Well, the tail curves right up that seam. So what you want to do when you rig this worm, you want to take and stick the hook in the head of the worm and just go in about 1/4 inch. Bring the point of the hook right out on that seam. Okay? You brought the point out right out on the seam. Slide the worm up over the knot. Once you get it over the knot, turn the hook completely around. All right? And then you're going to stick the point of the hook right back in the seam of that worm. You see how it's rigged straight? That's called a Texas rig worm, and it's rigged with the twister tail up. That's the proper way to rig a twister tail worm. But the main thing you want to notice on this is that worm is straight. It comes through the water straight. If the worm spins through the water, it'll twist your line. You want it to come through the water straight. Okay, and you notice how our bullet weight just slides right down on that worm. That way when a fish grabs this worm, if he doesn't have the lead in his mouth, the lead will slide down the line, and he doesn't realize that there's any extra weight pulling against him. So it helps you to keep your fish to hold on to your bait once he gets it in his mouth. Now let's just talk briefly on colors. I can't touch on every color of plastic worm there is because there's just a million of them. The majority of them are made to catch fishermen and not fish. Of course, all of them will probably catch fish. But if you'll stick to basic colors, grapes, purple, chartreuse, green, red, and blue. Those are some of the basic colors of worms, and they will always produce. This is a snake-shaped worm. Now, if you think about it, probably every worm right here to a fish represents a snake, except for maybe that lizard would represent a salamander or a water dog or something. But all these are designed basically keeping what the fish feeds on in mind. So, you know, rather than try to get involved and talk about every type of worm that's on the market, we're just going to cover, you know, basically we're going to try to fish 2 or 3 of these different worms and show you that they'll all catch fish. But the reason I wanted to touch on them was because of your hook sizes. Now, what I rigged up right here was a 4/0 hook into this worm that we rigged right here. But now, when you drop down in size, like this little slender plastic worm here, or this one right here, you would want to go down to like a 3/0 hook. If you get even smaller on a smaller type worm, you'd want to drop down to a 2/0 hook. If you get into your larger baits like the snake, you'd want to use a 5/0 hook. So you adapt the size of your hook to the size worm that you're using. Okay, now let's get out there and catch a few fish on a plastic worm and get into setting the hook and your lure presentation and stuff like that. We talked about getting the plastic worm rigged up and everything. Now we're going to put it to action. Now, you remember what we said? The bass is a cover-oriented fish. So we're going to look for them in some kind of cover. Now you notice right here, we got a whole series of old dead bushes sticking up out of the water. This is a real good place to look for a bass. Now it's obvious the wind's blowing pretty hard, and you know, so it makes it even that much harder to catch a fish. But anytime you bass fishing, you're gonna have obstacles to overcome, and the wind is usually one of them. So it's a good thing that the wind's blowing like this today, so you can get a better understanding of what you got to do to approach these fish. Now the smart way to approach these bushes is from the downwind side and go into the wind. That way your boat's not blown in over your covers. So you want to ease up from the downwind side with your boat and get into position where you can present that lure in a proper method. Now the first thing you want to do is throw your lure to either side of the bushes, and hopefully the fish will come out and get it. That way when you set the hook on the fish, he won't be inside the bush and harder to get out. So my first approach is to throw the bait right on the outside of the bush. I'm going to spray a little fish formula on this thing. That always helps to catch fish. I believe in that stuff, and I use it all the time. So we throw it on the outside of the bush and just see if maybe they'll come out. We've got a little bit of a cold front today, and when you do get a cold front and it starts jacking with the barometer, the fish get a little tighter to cover and they're harder to catch. Now when you work that worm, what you want to do is let that worm fall to the bottom. Okay? And then once that worm hits the bottom, you just want to take your rod tip from about 10 o'clock and move it to 12. Let it fall again. Pick it up. And see, I'm on some brush right there, and what I want to do is just barely ease it off that brush where it'll fall right back down in the cover again. And it looks like it's going to make us throw right up in the bush to catch one. We got us a northeast wind blowing today, and it's one of the hardest winds to catch fish out of. We're going to go right up in the bush and catch one. See what happens. We tried the outside and he wasn't there. I believe one got it going down. He did. Come here, baby. There we go. See, you got to watch your line, too. Now, I didn't say anything about that, but I just saw my line. Uh-oh. Fish got me wrapped up. Here's another reason for that 20-pound test line right there. There, we got her out. Pretty healthy fish. Go. It's just dogging down there. Whoa. See, that worm was sinking and that fish ran out there and got it. And I just happened to be watching my line and saw it twitch. Come here, darling. There we go. Nice. Fat fish almost tricked me. See, if I hadn't been watching my fishing line and I'd waited and then went to raise up and I'd just thrown right up in the middle of that bush, that fish would have done wrapped me all around that bush and I probably wouldn't have caught her. Paying attention, that's what it takes a lot of times to catch them. Let's see if there's another one in there. Now, I'm going to show you a little trick right here about plastic worm fishing. Now, I'm going to go up to that bush again, but I'm going to throw a different color in there. A different type. I'm going to try a little lizard. Got a blue and black back lizard. Let's just see what happens there. See, a lot of times if you'll keep changing colors off the same area, you'll get some more fish to bite. The reason I think there's more fish there is that fish was very aggressive. It ran out there and got that worm before it ever got to the bottom the first time. Get a little more formula on there. All right, now what I've told you, presentation is very important. I'm gonna lay it right up in the middle of that bush again and just see if there's a few more fish in there. There's a fish right there. There we go. Boy, that's a good fish. Cutting up. A lot of times, bigger fish just seem to like that lizard. Boy, that's a good one. That's a mean one. Yeah. Good old bass fishing. Come here, little gal, and say aye. Whoop. Don't rush things. Cutting up. There we go. Boy, look at that fish. This is the spring of the year, and you look all the roe in that fish. This fish is ready to get in there and spawn. And we just barely had it. Kept that tight line on her, though, and got her to the boat. Now that fish hit just outside the front of that bush. You know, I travel all over the country doing fishing seminars, and I get a lot of questions on plastic worm fishing. You know, how do you tell, how do you detect the strike, and how do you set the hook? Well, I'm going to try to do this step by step, and I want you to pay real close attention to what I'm doing and how I'm working this worm. Okay, now, you take and throw this worm. We're getting the strikes right up inside that clump of dead limbs right there. So you throw your worm right up in the brush, okay? Let it go to bottom. Now, when you start to work this worm back, what you want to do is just short, steady pumps, okay? In other words, you don't want to sweep that rod too much and pull that worm too far away from the cover too quick, so you'll pass up a lot of fish. So you just want to ease that worm along, just short, steady hops off the bottom. Now, I didn't really get close enough to that bush that time. This wind is really playing heck with me. I'm going to ease up closer. All right, now let's get right up in that bush again. Oh, there we go. Easy does it. That might have been the only two in there. But when a fish picks that worm up, it's just like a little peck. Okay, it's not a joke. Now you don't start trying to pull the rod out of your hand or anything. It's just a peck on that worm, and you can feel that little tap. It's almost like that piece of lead you got on the top of that worm bumped cover or something. It feels exactly the same way almost. All right, there he is right there. I got that peck. You want to get a good steady sit on that fish. Just like this, hit him as hard as you can hit him. There we go. You got to hit him hard. Disorient him, boy. He's cutting up. Or make him, you hit her hard, you turn her head your way and get her coming your way, and you got her whipped. If you don't, and she gets her own head and goes her own way, she's going to whip you. All right, another football-looking fish. Here we go. All right, it's plastic worm fishing. Pay attention to what you're doing. Adapt your equipment to what you're doing. And get out there and catch them. It's not that hard. Get out there and try different techniques. Remember to change your colors. Once you catch a fish on a certain type of cover, look for more of that cover on the lake and see if that's a producing pattern. All right, let's go see if we can catch some fish on a crankbait. Okay, we're coming out of the worm fishing segment and going into crankbait fishing. And it's two entirely different types of fishing, and the main reason is because of the equipment. Now, we discussed the worm fishing method where you needed that heavy action rod and you know, something that, a heavy rod where you could really move that fish. Well, crankbait fishing is entirely different because you need a limber action rod. Now, the length is basically the same, 7-foot rod, but that rod tip is very limber. See what I mean right here? We've really got a lot of tip action here. That is very, very, very important because that rod has to give with that fish. Because when you're crankbait fishing, your crankbait has got small hooks on it. Okay, so see, basically you've got more or less a bluegill size hook or possibly a crappie hook, but you don't have anywhere near the size hook like we had on that one single hook on the worm fishing, the 3/0 to 5/0 hook. So what happens? That fish runs up there and grabs this bait and she's got it in her mouth. She gets excited because she's hooked. And you get excited because you got her hooked. And y'all go to fight. Well, what happens is she's fighting and dogging and jumping and everything, she's tearing hooks out of her mouth. Okay, well if you had a stiff rod and you're fighting against that fish as hard as you can because you're excited, well, you start tearing hooks out of her mouth. Those hooks are not designed to be able to stand up against a stiff rod. So you got that limber rod. It gives with that fish. Every time that fish makes that lunge, the rod gives and the hooks will stay in its mouth better. The same way with your drag system. Your drag should allow like a 3-pound fish to pull drag on it. It should be a smooth system. We talked about this quantum reel. It's got a real smooth drag. Very important crankbait fishing. The rod, 7 foot, enables you to make longer casts. Okay, long casts are important with crankbait because a normal crankbait is designed to run anywhere from 7 to 8 to 10 foot deep, a deep diving crankbait. That's basically what we're going to be concerned with out there fishing today. So if you take a long rod, a 7-foot rod, it enables you to cast a lot further. When you can cast further, you can get your bait to dive deeper. So that's basically why we use that 7-foot rod. We got the limber action, we got a long handle on that rod, which enables you to brace yourself. You'll notice while I'm out there fishing, I'm using that handle either braced on my arm or braced against my side, and it helps me throughout the day. If I'm fishing a crankbait all day long, I won't get anywhere near as tired. Now your line is very important. Again, I use Trilene XT fishing line, but I use green when I'm crankbait fishing. You see it a lot better inside the reel here. Green fishing line. The reason for that is the least visible line. When I'm crankbait fishing, I want that bait to look as natural as possible because we want to trick that fish. And the best way to trick that fish is make that thing look as natural as possible. So when you use green line, that bait comes swimming through the water and the fish can't really see the green line. Now you got to tie your bait on. You got an eye on your bait. Okay, basically what you do is you run that line through the eye of the bait. Now this knot is a loop knot. It's called a king sling knot. It's a real effective knot. It's 90 to 100% effective. So basically what you do, you run the line through the eye of that bait, you fold the line over your index finger and get a hold of the bill of the bait. You give it 3 twists. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that forms a loop. You run your crankbait through that loop, and that turns you into a figure 8. Right there's your figure 8 right there. You'll take the back of that figure 8 and hook it behind the eye of that bait and just ease that 8 right down close to the eye of the bait. Once you get it down close, unhook the back part of that figure 8 off the eye. There's your figure 8. Cinch down. Wet it. Cinch it up. That gives you a loop knot. Okay, that knot is highly effective because it gives that bait freedom of action. It's a very good knot. It's very strong. There's 2 knots you need to remember. The trilene knot for the worm fishing, the king sling knot for the crankbait fishing. All right, now let's get into where we're going to throw these crankbaits. To me, a crankbait is very good on open lake structure, on a change of depth. That's the most important thing, a change of depth. Where you've got water coming out and it's 4 or 5 foot deep, let's say 3 to 5 foot deep, falling into deeper water, possibly into 15, 20, 25, even 30 foot of water. So you want that bait digging in the bottom, and what it does, it basically runs down there, digs in the bottom, and as it comes off that ledge, it starts to dive again. Most of the time the fish is hanging right off the side of that ledge. So when we go out there fishing these crankbaits, you'll see we'll pull up on a ledge, right off the front side of a ledge, we'll throw these crankbaits around the cover on either side of the cover and bring it right down off that drop-off. And most of the time the fish are hanging right on the side of that ledge. So let's go out there and give it a try and see if we can make these crankbaits work for us. Okay, we discussed the equipment we needed for crankbaits and why we needed that specialty rod, that good limber rod to get with the fish because of the small treble hooks. Now, we talked about the cover that we normally throw these baits around. Now, we're fixing to fish a similar situation right here where we've got good cover up on top of a bar, kind of out in the open lake, and the water on the front side of that cover is falling off fairly deep, like 3 to 5 feet, falling into 15, 20, and even 25 feet. Hopefully the fish will be hanging either up on the bar or right off the edge of the bar. Let's throw it up there and just see. We're going to have to throw to the side of the cover because, you know, it's natural. You can't throw all these exposed treble hooks right up inside the cover. So what we want to do is come off the edge of that bar and just see if there's any fish holding there. Like I told you before, that lip on that bait digs along the bottom. There he is right there. Came off that bar and he got it. There we go. We're in business. That gummy staying down. What we got here? Ah, nice fish. He stayed down. We got him hooked where he couldn't hardly fight. Yep. Well, just like we said he was supposed to be. Right off the edge of that bar. It came off the edge in about 7 or 8 foot of water and the fish grabbed it. Let's see if we got some bigger ones up there. That didn't really give you a good idea of how this rod's supposed to work for you. The way the fish was hooked, he couldn't really fight that good. All right. Right alongside the brush and come off the bar. Good feeling stuff in there. There he is. Oh, I believe that's a good one. Boy, these little fish don't want to come up. Oh, there he goes. See how that rod? See, if I had too stiff a rod, it'd rip those hooks right out of his mouth. Oh, yeah. Good fish. Keep your drag loose where a good healthy fish can pull drag so he don't tear those hooks out. That one's hooked the same way. It's kind of like they're just swatting at it and not really honing in on it real good. Kind of had him in a predicament too. You get one, maybe we'll get a good fight out of one in a minute. All these old fish are just busting with eggs. It's early spring and they're about ready to do it. Remember we talked about your colors. Now, you know, I mentioned something about springtime, how your brighter colors seem to produce a little better in the springtime. Your crawfish colors and your chartreuse colors. You notice here we're throwing that man's deep hog, that chartreuse colored bait. And it seems like they're gonna really eat it up. Let's get up there again and see if we can catch that with mama. They're catching it just as it comes off that ledge. Oh, felt like one bumped at it anyway. There he is. He just didn't get it the first time. Whoa. Well, what something's got on his mind? Not fighting very hard. What's he gonna do? Well, that's a pretty good fish. Uh-oh. It's not hooked very good. He was just swimming along with it, acting like he didn't even know he was hooked. All right. Now he's gonna fight. Now he decided he was hooked. Whoa. All right, now come on. Give up. Whoa, he got the hooks all up in it. Not a very good way to grab him. There we go. That's a nice fish. I think that fish nipped at that thing one time and didn't get it, and then he came back and got it. There we go. Healthy 3-pounder or more anyway. One more try. Oh no! Come on, darling, get out of there. Golly, that fish. I took the bait away from him. My bait got hung on a limb. Oh, he didn't. I thought he got off. Whoa, that's a good fish. Come here, darling. Don't jump. Oh, quit that jumping. He come up there and got it off the limb, I believe. Look at that, I was fixing to quit. It pays to make that one more cast. Look what a fish. Boy, now that's a fine specimen of a bass right there. I don't know if y'all were watching good, but she almost got my rod. I wasn't expecting her, but you always got to be expecting them. That is a fine fish. Good old crankbaits. I love them. Good healthy fish. Okay, that's crankbait fishing. A good ride. You saw how that fish got me and made that hard lunge. If I'd had a heavy rod, I might have lost that fish. That rod gave her that fish, got it to the boat. Remember, vary your retrieve, vary your colors. Get in there and let that crankbait hunt for you. They'll catch fish. Now we're going to get into spinnerbait fishing, which is a very popular way to catch largemouth bass. It's probably only second to the plastic worm. We're going to basically just briefly touch on the three main kinds of spinnerbaits, and then we're going to get into the proper way to fish them. There's three types of blades mainly. You've got the willow leaf blade, which is this blade, this long-shaped blade right here. Then you've got the Indiana blade, which is more of a teardrop shape, like this blade here. And then you've got the Colorado blade, which is more of a round teardrop shape. And basically, they're all spin-offs of each other. But they've all got a little bit different shape to them, and they all throw a little bit of a different vibration in the water. And sometimes that can make a difference in whether the fish will bite or not. My favorite bait is the willow leaf blade, a number 5 willow leaf blade in a 3/8 ounce size. The three main sizes of spinnerbait: a 1/4 ounce, 3/8, and 1/2 ounce. A 1/4 ounce is real good for pulling a spinnerbait over grass and stuff like that. 3/8 ounce is good for just going down the bank fishing, pulling it through logs and through brush and decent cover. The 1/2 ounce is more or less a bait for when you really want to crawl the bait on the bottom or bring it through heavy cover and keep it down. All right, one of the best ways to fish a spinnerbait is to buzz it more or less, not buzz it, but pull it just under the surface, waking, where you can see the blade. A lot of times the fish will hit a spinnerbait and you won't feel him, but you'll see the blade, the flash and everything just disappear. That gives you that indication to go ahead and set the hook. If they won't hit it that way, you can more or less medium retrieve it back to the boat on like 2 foot or 3 foot under the water at maximum. And then you get into slow rolling the spinnerbait where you're more or less crawling it along the bottom, just barely letting the blades turn over. Those are the 3 main ways to fish them. Now there's one more type of spinnerbait, a single spin spinnerbait. It's very important when you're slow rolling. It's got a heavy head and it's got a single blade just to throw it that extra flash, but you can even pump it like a worm or a jig. A lot of times that's what they want. The 2 main ways we'll probably catch fish today will be more or less a medium retrieve through the brush around the bank, and then out on ledges, kind of slow rolling this single spin off of the ledge and dropping it off into deeper water. Let's briefly touch on the rod and reel. My favorite type rod and reel is a 6-foot rod, medium heavy action. In other words, it's got some backbone. It's not quite as heavy as that worm or jig rod, but it's got a lot of backbone where you can go ahead and force the fish out of that heavy cover. I use a pretty heavy line. Again, I use Trilene XT, and I use about a 17 to 20 pound test line. Is the basic pound test for spinnerbait fishing. I wouldn't drop down any less than 14. So 14 to 20 with 17 being your major pound test for using it. As far as your knot's concerned, it's the basic same knot that we tied on the worm hook and that we tied on the jig. The basic Trilene knot, we call it, a fisherman's knot. You know, the cover that you look for is just like I said earlier, going down the bank, throwing at any object you can see, bringing it through the brush, treetops, overhanging willow limbs. And then when you get out on those ledges, it's similar to the type stuff we fish the other things around, the crankbait and the spinnerbait. There's one thing that you need to do to a spinnerbait that really makes it effective. You need to put a trailer on it. You notice here we got a white trailer slid up on this spinnerbait. Basically, this is a spinnerbait trailer. Here's 3 of my favorite colors in the spinnerbait trailer right here. You got your white, your chartreuse, and your lime green. And the basic colors for spinnerbait, white, chartreuse, and black. There's a lot of spin-offs of those colors. You got some tri-colors on there, like here's blue, chartreuse, and white. There's plain chartreuse. A lot of times, instead of using a plastic trailer, I'll use a pork trailer. Uncle Josh pork bait. This here's a spring lizard, one of my favorite trailers for a spinnerbait. You can take and just hook that trailer on the hook. There's a little hole at the head of this pork, and it just dangles off the end of that spinnerbait and gives it a lot more added action. If you don't do that, you take and put your plastic trailer, just thread it up on the hook. Slide it up on there. Okay? Trailers are very important for spinnerbait. One more thing we need to talk about is a trailer hook. You need to stick that trailer hook on your main hook. And what that does, you just slide it on there. There's a piece of surgical tubing over the eye of that hook. You slide it right through and it keeps that thing from coming back off. A lot of times when you're getting short strikes on a spinnerbait, this trailer hook down low, I'll give you that extra hump just to get that fish when he's hitting short. And I don't know how many times I've been saved. You get the fish up in the boat and you got him on the trailer hook. You never even touch this hook right here. So whenever your cover permit it, you need to stick that trailer hook on that spinnerbait. Let's go out there and try going down the bank, just chunking at objects and see if we can catch some fish that way. If we can't do that, we'll go out on some ledges and crawl that single spin off some ledges off into deeper water and see if we can catch them like that. Boy, can't get no prettier than that right there for bass. You ought to eat it. Oh, there he is. All right. Just slow rolling that thing and come out there and got it. Good fish. Reason to say that was too good a cover to not catch a fish out of on a spinnerbait in the springtime. Boy, he hopped on it too. I tell you, he really hit it. I thought he was going to be bigger than that. Let's see if there's another one in there. I was just kind of slow rolling it through there. Maybe that's what they want. Slow it down even more this time and see what happens. Boy, that's one of the hardest strikes I've ever had on a spinnerbait. Hey, he's hit it. Oh, I missed him. Oh, damn it. Now that right there is a prime example of what we talked about when we were talking about our spinnerbaits and everything. I should have had a trailer hook on that spinnerbait, and I didn't. And I missed that fish. Now I'm going to take just a second and put a trailer hook on here and see if that'll enable me to catch that fish so I don't get him this time. Now remember what I said on those short strikes. When you get short strikes like that, if you'll take a trailer hook, I'm going to rob this one right here. I think it'll be my quickest way. You'll take and stick your trailer hook right back on that spinnerbait. You'll catch your short strike. Let's try it now. See if he's going to bite. He's right outside that bush when he hit. Well, I got to try my willow pin in there one more time. Then we'll go. Sure they hit that thing hard. Well, let's go try a ledge for them a little bit deeper, see if they're hanging on those ledges like they were with the other stuff. We'll find them one way or the other. Like I said before, we're going to try this single spin crawling off these ledges. And another added comfort of this type bait right here, it's got a good heavy bait. It's like a half-ounce head on there, and fishing it in heavy wind like this, it's a lot easier to fish. You can stay in contact with it a lot better. A lot of times they'll hit it just like they do a worm. They'll just bump it. When I was talking about that half-ounce lead, that jig spinner is easy with wind blowing. So you keep it in the cover. When it falls off that ledge, it'll fall straight, a lot straighter down than a lighter weight or a spinnerbait with two blades on it. It's one of the main reasons I like to fish it on these drops. Let's see. Where it ought to be, right there. Come on, darling. There he is. Yeah, that's a good fish. Right. Look at that. Boy, he wanted that thing. He ate it. Got it way down in his throat. There we go. Old jig spinner. That fish is serious about eating that thing. There we go. Just easing it along there. We're going to get into the jig and pig type fishing now. And when I say jig and pig, I mean basically a jig, which you see laying right here, and by the pig, we mean a piece of pork rind. You know, we talked a little bit about the pork rind with the spinnerbait, but this is where the pork rind really is important. The because a cork is probably the best trailer you can put on a jig. That's why it's known worldwide or nationwide as a jig and pig type fishing. Now, when you get into jigs, you don't get into various sizes like you do all these other baits. But basically, from a 1/4 ounce to 1/2 ounce is about the main size of a jig. And if you're going to be in tight on cover, in thick cover, pitching and flipping, I would use a 1/2 ounce jig. If you're going to back off a little bit and cast to cover and not be right up in the middle of it, you can drop down into a 3/8 ounce jig. But the main thing to remember about jig and pig, it's basically the same thing as worm fishing. You've got to have that good heavy rod, heavy line. I would recommend, again, stay up in the 17 to 20 pound test line most all the time with a jig and pig. As you'll see while we're out there fishing this bait, we're going to be throwing it up in the cover. We're going to fish it on the outside of the cover some. But most of the time, we usually take this jig and we put it right up in there right with the fish. And a lot of times we're right in close, right over the fish, dropping it down vertical or pitching it right up in the middle of the cover. So you got to pay attention. You got to hit that fish right when he bites it. It's very crucial. You know, I'll probably miss some fish while we're fishing out there because if that fish gets it and he's right up in that thick cover and you give him time to move, he gets you wrapped up and you can't get him out. Let's go out there and try it. And while we're fishing along, I'll be explaining a little bit more about what we're doing, and hopefully we'll catch some good fish on it. It's known as a big fish bait. Catches a lot of good fish. Let's go try it. There you go. Oh boy, we got a mama here. That's a mule. Whoa, Nelly. Stay with me, darling. Yeah, that's a good fish right there. All right. Boy, that's the one the doctor ordered right there. Come here. Good old jig and pig. This is them big ones. Yeah. One little old thump on that jig. See what a nice fish. Jig and pig. It's known for big fish. When we talked about the jig and pig, I said it's basically fish just like the plastic worm. And there's really not hardly any difference except for one thing. Seems to me like you need to leave that jig down on the bottom as much as possible and not move it near as high when you're pumping it back to the boat. It's more or less just a real short hop on the bottom. Because what that thing's simulating, like we've already said, is a crawfish. You know, so and most crawfish are on the bottom, you know, so you want that thing to stay near as close to the bottom as possible and just get a little short hop. The strikes seem to come the same as a plastic worm, you know, just a peck. A lot of times they'll hit a little harder than they'll hit a plastic worm, but it's still the same deal, just a little peck, and you need to go ahead and hit the fish pretty quick on a jig because you got a heavier weight there, and the fish will drop it. Now with that cork rind trailer on it, a lot of it'll hold it a little longer, but you still need to hit him as quick as you can. Oh boy. Uh-oh. Come on out. Yeah. Golly. Right up in that cover. I don't know if we're going to get her or not. Yeah. I mean, she was right up in the middle of it. Come here. Yeah, there we go. Another nice big fish. All right, folks. We covered several different ways to catch this young lady out here, a largemouth bass. We've had some hectic weather. The wind's blowing real hard. And we had a little cold front come through. And hopefully, we've passed on to you the basics of trying to get out there and catch these bass. 4 of the main ways to do it. Spinnerbait didn't work out for us very well. We caught just a couple of fish on it, but the fish just were not on it. It just goes to show you that you gotta shop your bait. You gotta throw what the fish wants to eat. You won't always hit one certain bait all the time. So hopefully you can take what we've done today, put it together, and get out there and do a little bit better bass fishing. One point I'd like to make to you, y'all remember, these are our fish, and our kids' fish, and their kids after them fish. So take care of them, just use what you need, put the rest of them back, and God bless you.
We hope you enjoyed the basics of bass fishing with Paul Elias. The next time you're out on the water, in good weather or bad, remember, many times you'll catch more and bigger bass by going back to the basics.